Hey there, I'm Aaron, and welcome to the Call to Comics and Call to Cinema. And to be kind of bluntly honest, we probably wouldn't have a Call to Cinema if this hadn't come along in the first place. Well, not this particular issue though. Nick Spencer's run on The Amazing Spider-Man is probably the best run I've seen since Roger Stern. And if you're a Spider-Man fan, you can probably know what high praise that is. This particular arc is really good in setting up what's coming next, which is the Sinister War. But tonight I thought I'd talk a little bit about a couple of things. One of those is the era, or the definition of the era of comics. And I hope that if you're you watch my cinema videos, that you're not going to turn it off right now because you're like, oh no, he's talking comics, or that you have actually, congratulations if you hit it and it says Call to Comics and you're still watching, because I truly appreciate that. I do want to make sure that my channel is pretty well rounded and is honest to all my passions, and this definitely is one of my serious passions. One of the things that I truly enjoy in this world is to open up like a new comic or to get a new omnibus. There's nothing more exciting for me than that day. It's been a while since I got one of these big babies, but we'll hopefully have some coming in the near future. You'll see that soon. We'll be doing a video on that sometime in early August, I think. So the one thing I wanted to talk about was the eras of comics, and most of the time you'll find them broken down into the Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, and then it's just the Modern Age. And the Modern Age just sweeps up everything else. And I've never liked those definitions for the comic eras. For the Golden Age, it definitely makes sense. This is the start. This is the big point where comics are becoming a thing. This is the years of Superman. These are the years when comics are still at the point where they've just gotten past and are still actually like pages from the funny pages from newspaper strips and stuff that are being like pushed together to make a comic book, and we get our first like big superhero with like Superman, and we get Batman, and then you get into the Silver Age, and you notice that the Silver Age talks a lot with like DC characters, because you get like the Silver Age or like the Flash, and because it's no longer he's no longer wearing the helmet with the lightning. That's a different Flash. This Flash is now the brand new Barry Allen Flash, but that's because in the early years of comics, it really was kind of defined in a lot of cases, especially for the mainstream comics, for DC. In actuality, Marvel, which was called Timely back in the day, they too were kind of defined by DC, since they used their publisher, and it wasn't until the late 60s that Marvel would actually be allowed to publish more books than 8, and so they could only have 8 in rotation initially. That's why you got so many like kind of anthology books. That's why it wasn't called Thor, it was called Journey into Mystery. That's why you had things that were like Amazing Fantasy, and it was only when you got like a comic that was going to end it that they would take that chance to fill that spot. Amazing Fantasy, they put Spider-Man in at the very last issue. It was called Amazing Adult Fantasy before that. Last issue called Amazing Fantasy, they put Spider-Man in there as a character that the editor did not think was going to work. Really took off, and so from there was a spot left out from where Amazing Fantasy had ended, and that brought in Spider-Man, and my personal favorite character of all time. And I know people got their favorites, whether it be Batman or Superman. Spider-Man is one of those characters that, and maybe it's because I grew up with my grandparents and they had like stuff like soap operas and stuff like that too. Spider-Man has this really interconnected like web, I guess, of characters that are used throughout the series, and I really enjoy that about the character. But getting back to the age, so that would be like the Silver Age of comics. Next up is what we call the Bronze Age, and the Bronze Age is usually referred to as around 1970 to 1984. So in other words, when I was growing up, I was born in 71, and I was reading comics from a very early age. I think I read my first comic book. I I read very young. I was a very young reader, and I was a very voracious reader, and I would read everything. Books, comics. If you gave me the telephone book back in the day, I would have probably read that too. But that would have been my era of like reading comics. I was a student of like people like Roy Thomas and Roger Stern. I would know like from the Marvel Tales issues. I would be able to see the older issues with like Jack Kirby and stuff with Stan Lee and Steve Ditko, and through like things like Conan, I'd meet guys like Barry Windsor Smith and John Buscema, and just so many fantastic like artists and writers that would like kind of grace my my life through looking through the pages of these comics. So the Bronze Age was my era of comic books, or at least my first era, which we'll get into actually. But I would have pushed the Bronze Age probably up until around 1990, in all honesty, as opposed to 1984, which is where they tend to end it. And they do tend to do that, or at least in 1986, because if we're going to define it in the way that we define the bronze, so the gold and the silver age, then 1986, of course, is after Crisis on Infinite Earths. So we get the new John Byrne era of Superman. And we get like a lot of characters being redefined. We get the character of Robin now being Jason Todd being redefined again, because he'd just been introduced, and he gave him another origin. They kind of retconned his origin, did that whole thing with that, and then it goes into what's called the modern age. But I don't want to go with that. We're not going to call it the modern age here in the Call of Comics. We're going to do something different. So in the 90s, especially around the mid 90s, there was a boom in comics. A huge kind of like speculator market came into play. Wizard's Guide to Comics came out, and it was like this thick, initially very thick guide on comics and comic prices and comic card prices, and there was like articles. And I think Gareb Shamus is one of the kind of guess one of the better known editors of Wizard Comics, but they had some amazing people like work through Wizard through the years. You would, if you were a comic reader, you would buy your comics every month. You'd have your pull box. For those that don't that are watching this don't normally buy comics, normally if you were at like even at a comic shop or at a store and that regularly sold comics, and you were you knew the people that were there. Or for comic shops, it's pretty standard anyway. You could go in like first day and kind of do it. But I had there was this video shop. Big surprise there, right? Video store. I knew the owners of the video store very well, and they had comics come out on a regular basis, much like you'd see in a lot of like drugstores back in the day, and in your corner stores you see like the spin rack of comics. Well, they would bring in comics, and comics were big then. So it was going through the whole death of Superman. We had like Nightfall. There was a ton of like big event comics going on, like Spider-Man, and like there's Maximum Carnage, which actually got me out of reading Spider-Man for a while. It was just a little too crossovery. X-Men was really big on that too. For all, X-Men was really big on doing like crossovers. It's kind of like when you think about it, there's like the Mutant Massacre started like back in the mid '80s, and it was like, oh yeah, look, we're going to do a kind of a crossover, but every storyline in the Mutant Massacre can kind of be their own thing. So if you don't read X-Men and you just read X Factor, you're good. You're fine. You're great with that. You don't need to follow it through. But as he came through with things like Extinction Agenda and storylines like Onslaught and Age of Apocalypse, then you had to read every single issue and the tie-in issues, and you wanted to get the whole thing to get the complete experience of what it was. But throughout that big boom of comics came a oversaturation, and because these people that actually did not like comic books came in thinking, okay, somebody bought Superman back in the 1930s, and now Superman's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm going to buy this issue of Death of Superman. It's going to be worth a lot of money. Not thinking about the fact that, well, because comics were extremely popular now, because it's not like back in the day when, paper was rare and they recycled a lot of stuff, and it was the whole like comics, like the comic scare, the whole scary part of comics. We'll get into that one these days too. That there's a lot being published. So everybody was buying number ones, and number one issues of comics are normally, especially event comics by the way, are normally the most published comics out there. it's a little hint, a little tip for people that kind of collect, or one, collect for stuff you like. Don't collect for money, but issues 2s and 3s are usually 3s are printed a bit more. Issue 2s normally, and even issue 3s are usually have a lower print run than a first issue. A first issue always usually gets a higher print run. But eventually, when people realized there wasn't going to be like this big score at the end of the rainbow, or at least not for any time in the near future, and comics tried to like just come in and bring like, chromium covers, and here's our new universe, and here's like Dark Horse, and they're doing comics, and there's Milestone, and they're doing comics, and now we got like the Earth X universe, and here's another company that's doing comics, and there's Valiant, and there's this company that's doing comics, and to get their first comic, you got to buy a whole set of trading cards and put them there, and you can read them that way. So there's a whole bunch of gimmicks that were going around. There's way too many comics, too many universes, too much being done for it to actually be sustainable. And a lot of like creators and comic companies crashed under it. They came about these side image comics that had broken away. They were the most popular people from Marvel, have broken off and did their own thing. And people had initially laughed at it, that okay, well, they're gonna work for like 5 or 6 months and then go back to Marvel because it's not, they can't do it. Like Todd McFarlane, look, yeah, he's an artist and people like him on Spider-Man, but are they really gonna follow him over to his own company? Really? Yes they are, and he's still doing it. Actually, it's Spawn, like from Todd McFarlane to Jim Lee to Rod Liefeld to Will Sperstatio to Mark Silvestri. Yeah, if you've ever read The Darkness or played that cool ass game, then that's where that comes from. As does Witchblade. It's the same universe. They revolutionized what comics could be, but they made a lot of people think that they could do it too, and not everybody could. So the crash eventually happened, and we're going to retitle that era right now. And we're going to call that the Dark Age. So the 90s era is going to be the Dark Age of comics. And when I say the Dark Age, I'm not saying it just like because the crash or because, they made a lot of really unusual decisions and strange comics, such as the 90s Clone Saga, which was supposed to go about 5 issues, but where Ben Reilly takes over as Spider-Man when he finds out he's the real Peter Parker, because of something that happened in the 70s. We'll probably get into the Clone Saga later on. I'll do another video on that, actually. It's actually really interesting, because this was supposed to run around 5 or 6 issues and just start a new norm. This is volume 2 of Spider-Man, the Ben Reilly years, which ends the Ben Reilly years. There is a volume 1 of this. There's an omnibus volume 1, and there are 2 Clone Saga omnibuses, aside from this one and the other Ben Reilly one. So, as you can imagine from that amount of material, yeah, it kind of got out of hand. So we're going to retitle that the Dark Age because, well, we did have the speculator market, but because comics did tend to go grittier and get darker and have more like serious, kind of like really serious characters. They might like fun characters like Lobo, but they were still death destruction characters. And it was a time where they maybe took themselves just a wee bit too seriously sometimes, and that's not always a bad thing, because we did get some great stuff out of that era, and it's one of the eras that I do like to collect the most. I only have the Ben Reilly one, but on my list of omnibuses that I want to collect, there is the 80s, 90s era that really stands out to me, and that's because one of the reasons I can sit down and I can talk about comics with you guys and talk about this stuff is because I was going to open a comic shop. I actually had my business planned up. I was in the final stages of actually signing the papers to do a comic shop, and I missed my appointment, unfortunately, and there was only so much funding going out, like grants for new businesses at the time, and I missed out on it by 1 day. Now, some people say it's probably a good thing, because the comics, the whole bottom for the comics industry for a while, so that definitely would have struggled. But it was my dream, and it has been since I've been very young. I got into comic books and that was the gateway what got me into films. As much as like I'd like to just say that it was watching like Bela Lugosi's Universal Dracula that got me into watching the Dracula films and the Hammer stuff, it was just as much seeing Gene Colan's Tomb of Dracula, and seeing what had been done with that, and the Monster of Frankenstein comic book that was out as well. Those things were incredibly influential to me and did make me want to go out and see the film sources of these here. And because films are done in such a way that they're storyboarded, and it was really mind-blowing to find that out when I was a kid, that I could look at these comics and I could read through them, and I could literally see, like, I'll just take this one for example, how you could storyboard a film, a lot of cases in the way that you can see the panels on a comic book. And when I was writing early, when I used to write a lot of short stories when I was young, and I would often, even just for my short stories, what I would do is I would get an idea and I would take some paper and I would kind of storyboard out my idea of what I wanted to do. I had no idea at the time that I wanted to do anything with film or even anything with comics or anything like that. It was just basically was a visual way for me to structure the story that I was writing at the time. And I often used to do that. So I had one book that was my book where I do my writing, and I had another book where I'd kind of storyboard out what I thought and where it was going to go, where it came from. I know it's kind of a long roundabout way to go about the ages, but I wanted to give like a bit of a backstory to why I've branched out and why I'm doing the Call to Comics now, along with Call to Cinema. It's not replacing the Call to Cinema. It's just an additional bonus to go along with it. And for those that enjoy it, and for those that give it a chance, thank you so much, because I'm talking about something that I feel very passionate about. We're going to be doing soon a video talking about the different formats, because I know some people, they're collecting the especially when you're getting into it, you wonder, like, okay, so there's the epic collections, there's omnibuses, there's treasury editions, there's hardcovers, graphic novels, oversized hardcovers. What's the difference? Where does the designation go? And we're going to talk about that. We're actually going to get into that into the Call to Comics, and I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I enjoy making these videos. It takes a long time to do one, especially one of these, because it's one of those times where this is not scripted out, and it's definitely pretty obvious to you guys. But I still have all the points that I want to make all along the way. So hopefully this becomes a bit of a slightly visual, but for a lot of you guys, probably if you've got this put on, you're listening to it where you do housework or workout or whatever, a bit of an audio journey. And there's another reason for that as well. I am planning on starting up, I mentioned this before a long time ago, but I'm still working on starting up a podcast. I had initially been going to start it when I got to Morocco, but that has slowed down. My trip has slowed down. I'm hoping that I'm still going to Morocco within the same time frame, but I'm working on now getting that podcast started up, hopefully in the near future. And I'll keep you guys updated when there are any big updates on that as well, because that's something that I really wanted to move towards. I'll still be on the YouTube channel, but I think that the podcast is definitely the next evolution of what this channel is going to be and what it can be. And hopefully you'll join me over there when I talk about everything from movies to films, to directors, to comics, to maybe music sometimes, because I'm always listening to good old Howlin' Wolf Records and their fantastic soundtracks. Listen to stuff like that as well. I'm a geek, but I'm a versatile geek. Right now, this particular time, what I'm reading is this right here, and it's something I recommend, especially if you're just getting in. It's hard. I want to recommend it if you're just getting into certain comics, but I'm also going to say it's different in that it is this is Marvel, and it's Fantastic Four for you, so you expect this certain kind of regular comic dynamic, but this is definitely more done like an indie comic style. This is more like a Scott McCloud's Guide to Comics type of thing, as it is to a regular comic, and you'll see that when show you a little bit of the artwork right here, which is utterly gorgeous. And there are treasure editions of these. You can buy hardcover ones. I think they run like pretty pricey, but you can buy like a soft kind of cloth cover ones for these treasure editions too, to see the artwork in in a better, more bigger format for usually around like $39 here in Canada, so probably $29 there in the US, and maybe even a little bit less over there in the UK. So we got to the Dark Age, and we've had some turns along the way. So what do we call now? So is now the modern age? And I think now is when we would get into what we would call the modern age of comics. So from like 2000 and on, but it seems like 21 years for one age. It still seems to me like it is a long time. Like bringing it from 1984 to onwards and just calling it the modern age, just like being that like loose with the specification, doesn't seem I don't know, it just doesn't fit for me. So I go back to the, how do we do this? How do we like put different eras into comics? And obviously the golden age, silver age, lasted extremely long. We got the Bronze Age, which of course was a little bit shorter. We got what I'm going to call now the Dark Age, which is going to bring us from like the going to like encapsulate the 90s, and then we get to like the 2000s, and as much as I hate to use the word modern age, I guess that's what we'll do when it comes to that. But I'll think about it. I'm actually going. This is an ongoing process here. I want to redefine on my channel here exactly what the comic book ages and eras are. I'm gonna go against the norm, I guess you could say. And that, this coming to the end of it, I wanted to like throw in a couple recommendations to you guys here. And I would definitely recommend that if you do want to check out some of the Dark Age, well, maybe the Reborn Age, because anyway, we'll get into that another time. Then I definitely would recommend the Spider-Man stuff, especially if you can get your hands on the out-of-print Clone Saga omnibuses. If you get extra copies, send them this way, because I'm still looking for them. But it does, like, it can be pretty expensive to look into some of this stuff. I do think that this, if you're a newcomer and you're wanting to check out certain like comic runs before you dive right into the omnibus, which I do think is fantastic, I do recommend that you check out some of these epics here. So this is the introduction of the character of Venom, basically the ending of the alien symbiote storyline, right up until like a really good chunk of like the early Venom stuff, pre-Lethal Protector. Lethal Protector actually gets its own epic collection coming out around December. Actually, this is the very first of the Venom ones. As you can see, it's on the back, not on the side, which makes it easier to put it in with other epics. Epics are like this. They're they're not super glossy like an omnibuses, but they're still extremely like well done, well put together, and the binding is way better than something you would see in like the earlier Essentials and like the DC Showcase Presents titles, which again I did a short video on. I asked if anybody wanted to see my complete collection. Nobody said yes, so I didn't make that video. Just to let you know, I do listen to you guys pretty much overall. I will be going through the different formats in the near future. I do also got to recommend like this as being kind of a neat little one. I probably wouldn't go with this one particularly, but they did a whole bunch of DC kind of like cross sections of characters. So this is the Joker, 80 years, the current Prince of Crime. If there is any, which is fantastic. This is an oversized hardcover, by the way. This is what you call an oversized hardcover. There are some fantastic stories, and in between each of the stories, there's written introductions by different people. There's amazing artwork here, as you can tell, and great stories. But I have to say that one of the disappointments of this book, and probably the only drawback, is that they talk about the Killing Joke, but they only give you 10 pages of the Killing Joke, and instead show it's a really good comic, Mad Love, but it's more of a Harlequin comic as opposed to a Joker comic. I'm glad to have it, but I'm pretty sure I got Mad Love in another collection, and this could have been taken somewhere else. done another way. But this is the 80 years. They did a bunch of these. They did one for Detective Comics, one for Action Comics. They did one for characters like Robin and characters like the Flash. And if you open them up, like take off the dust jacket, you can see these beautiful covers on the inside, and I think that's really, really gorgeous and a great way to do it. They're around the size, like they're not the length of an omnibus, but they are around the close to the same height as an omnibus would be. There are some great ones, and I think the Flash is a really good one, especially if you've only ever seen the TV show, or maybe you saw him in the Justice League film and you wanted to know what the Flash is like. You, in the 80 years, I'm pretty sure it goes through all the Flashes, from the Golden Age Flash to the Silver Age Flash to Wally West, and probably even to some Bart Allen as well. Maybe some Impulse in there, or maybe when Bart Allen became the Flash. There's a whole history to look into. So if this is your first time joining me on a comic journey, and you haven't yet gotten into this, or you've been thinking about it and been wondering how to go into it, well, don't worry. We are going to do a series of videos here talking about collecting comics. We're going to go through different eras. We're going to look at different formats, and we will look into different characters and writers. And I will be doing some of this here. I'll be doing some of this over on Patreon. It's going to depend on how popular this is on the main channel. But I do really like to talk about this stuff. We'll talk about the Vertigo era. We'll talk about people like Warren Ellis and Grant Morrison, and why those are important names that you should know. We'll talk about the madman himself, Alan Moore, and how he helped change and revitalize comics. And we will even talk about the very controversial and really strange Frank Miller, and the great things that he did for the industry, and then the bad things that he did later on with the industry. I am Aaron. Thank you for joining me tonight in the Call of Comics. If you've made it this far, thank you so much. Like, share, subscribe, all that jazz. And I'll see you right here again, whether it's a Call to Comics video or a Call to Cinema video. It's always exciting. It's always fresh. And right here in the Call to Comics, and as you can see if you look around my room, there's always one more comic to read. See you soon.